I'm together here with Nina Detlefsen to present to report from the CITIES task force and show our suggestions for new energy taxes and net tariffs. And I'll just have to do like this. The CITIES task force has been active from 2017 up until now. And we have members from DTU, Aalborg University, Danfoss, Teknologisk Institut, Grøn Energi, Tomorrow, Grundfos, and Ørsted. We have made recommendations regarding energy taxes, tariffs, and test zones. And the CITIES task force have had a significant impact on politicians and the civil service through hearings, meetings, and recommendations. So with our work, what is it we want to achieve? Well, we want energy taxes and net tariffs to support and accelerate the transition towards a world that runs entirely on renewable energy. And how can we do that? Well, we can spur implementation of known technologies at scale where it is already economical feasible. And it's a bit like Henrik talking about reverting the hockey stick. So let's do a lot now with the technologies we know and that are economical feasible now. So that is, of course, offshore and onshore wind, solar, heat pumps, district heating, district cooling, electric vehicles, and development of our transmission and distribution grid. But we also need to create incentives for boosting innovation where there are no mature solutions yet or where the cost of converting to renewable energy is too high. So that could be high temperature heat pumps, it could be power to X energy storage, and then all the digitalization that needs to bind this transformation together in a cost-efficient manner. So the principles we recommend for energy taxes is that energy taxes should be linked to the real-time emissions of CO2. We recommend that energy taxes should be harmonized between energy carriers, ensuring equal taxations of the emissions we want to prevent. And we have an example here where the CO2 emissions from gasoline is heavier taxed than CO2 emissions from diesel. So that gives a skew incitament in the way we consume energy. And there are lots of examples in that field. Furthermore, energy taxes should be harmonized between energy consumption types, ensuring equal incentives for emission reduction across sectors. And if I look in my private home, then when my computer and light is on, I pay taxes after one scheme. But when I charge my electric vehicle, I pay taxes for a second scheme. And if I wanted to change my gas heating with a heat pump, then I would pay taxes after a third scheme. So all in all, this is pretty inefficient and difficult to get around for normal people. And we are not alone with these very general principles. Dansk Industri, Cepos, Klimarådet, and many others suggest suggest using principles similar to what we have suggested here. So there's I would say consensus around the principles at least. We also recommend some actions. Denmark should of course actively work for a high European tax, CO2 tax, and common prevention of carbon leakage. The taxation of CO2 emissions should immediately be harmonized across energy carriers within the different sectors in Denmark. And then taxation of CO2 emissions should gradually be harmonized across sectors. The reason for doing this is that we need to create a level playing field where the most efficient technologies can be used to reduce our emissions. A fourth thing we suggest is to introduce a Danish CO2 tax for part of the industry that only pays the EU carbon credits. But an important detail is there that the revenue from that CO2 tax should be directed back to the individual company as a support for a sustainable transition of the company. In that way, we think that we can create a balanced incentive between the carrot and the stick, right? Because of course the company has to pay something, but they also have the possibility to kind of get the money back and invest it in their own transition. Diving into our suggestion for CO2 tax for the industry, we think that we will actually observe a big impact on sustainable transformation, even with a relatively low CO2 tax. And why is that? It's because if we know it from ourselves, if we have money or funds that are available, then creativity will flourish and bloom, and you will come up with a lot of good ideas. And I think it will give the last push for companies to implement mature sustainable technologies with a positive business case. And we know from Danfoss that there are a lot of cases out there where you already now, under the frame conditions that we have now, that you have a lot of business cases where you can adopt these sustainable technologies and, for example, electrify your heat consumption with heat pumps, etc. We also think that we will observe a significant boost of innovation in hard-to-abate sectors with full commitment from the industry. And again, you have reserved some funding where the industry has the possibility to invest in themselves and their sustainable transformation. And second of all, we think that we will observe an industry with a sharp competitive edge in a world that runs entirely on renewable energy. First of all, because they have already implemented the mature sustainable technologies that has a positive business case, so they will be cost efficient in the markets. And second of all, some people will develop sustainable business models and solutions that can be scaled out in a global economy that will run entirely on renewable energy within a relatively short time frame. And that was actually the words for me. So now I will pass on the word to my colleague in the CITIES Taskforce, Nina Detlefsen.
So I will take over from Jan here and tell about the task force work on electricity tariffs, and it's a slide on the end on test zones. Electricity tariffs is also one of the very important things needed to drive, you can say, green transitions and integrated energy systems. So tariffs, what are they? You can say tariffs are meant to be paying for the investment cost and the operational cost of the electricity infrastructure. And as this is one of the main, you can say, components of what we're paying, we think that they need to sort of be rethinked into this new world we are looking at. Or actually, it's not that new because it's been so for a while. But you can also, one other things it's worth to have in mind when we discuss tariffs is what is the objectives of tariffs. It's often politically based. But there is some need to requirements to fulfill, like for example requirements in the law, fairness principles. They have to be cost-based. They have to be non-discriminative, and there's some things that they have to fulfill. And then there has been some nice to that they we would like that nice to be that they support the integrated energy system and the green transitions and so on. They have been much more nice to in the way that they have been transparent and easy to understand and so on. Next, please. At the right here, you can see the energy system in Denmark, and it is transforming from a like a central production into a much more distributed production, and this also alters how the network is loaded. You can say in different areas. So in this, you can see there's local areas that has a lot of both production and consumption. That's the middle one. And therefore hardly any, you can say, transmission to the overlying networks. Whereas there's also local areas that has a lot of consumption, therefore a lot of transmission into the area, and vice versa. There's areas where you have a lot of local production and very little consumption, and therefore a lot upload up to the overlying areas. And then, in addition, in Denmark, it's a transit country because we are in between like highly productive Norwegian area with a very heavy consumption area south of the border. So there's a lot of transmission also. So all this, you can say, transmission and both on the transmission level and the distribution level have to pay for the investment in the entire system. The principle today actually is that the consumption pays a majority and the production pays very little. And you can say if that's a fair principle, and maybe we should rethink that in another way. Also, it has been so that it's a waterfall principle, and that is a very fair principle as long as the production comes from the overlaying areas and then flows down to the consumption areas in the bottom in this figure. And then there has been a partitioning into a distribution tariff and a transmission tariff, and the transmission tariff has been constant, whereas the distribution area has sort of been depending on the levels for how far down you are flowing, the electricity is flowing. So that's the principle today. And the next one. So the suggestion that we have is that tariffs should be much more based on time-specific actual load in the network, so that you both be time-specific and geographically distributed according to the load, so the momentarily load of the system. The long-term perspective is actually that we should go towards like a dynamic tariff that depends on the actual traffic in the network, and which is updated constantly and so on. And that is very much the same that Olivier Coadet said this morning with respect to like both the transmission or the tariffs, and also but also on the CO2 taxes and the production costs. But we don't think that this is going to be implemented in one step, you can say, because this will break very much with the, you can say, the transparency of the system. Therefore, we are proposing that we are even in a transition period, partition the tariff payment into a capacity payment and an energy-based payment. And actually, Dansk Energi has already started some of the ideas of this into some of the areas in Denmark. I mean, some of the voltage areas, you can say that is in a suggestion from them as well. But taking it a bit further, so the next, please. Then it is important that that this capacity payment reflects the fixed cost, and this fixed cost depends on the necessary payments in in the area and in the voltage area. If, for example, consumption is flexible and require few investments and reinforcements in the network, then there should be low capacity payment. And also, if consumption is interruptible, the capacity payment should also reflect this. So the capacity payments, in some sense, should be depending on how much of the capacity is reserved, both in the network and in the higher level network. Is reserved for this, you can say consumption, or it could also be production. Whereas the variable payment is that should sort of support the price signals, so that when there's lots of available capacity in the network, which means that the prices, the variable price is low and vice versa. This will help very much to smooth out the consumption and the production in a much more, you can say, stable way, so it stays within the limit of the capacity, and therefore you will not have to invest as much in the network and you build as large networks as otherwise. And that is an important vision in order to support the integrated energy system and the green transitions in the, as we see it. And therefore we need to start thinking more in this direction when we design also the tariffs. So go to the next one. So what we mean with this is that tariffs needs to be future ready, you can say. So in this way, we will have production and consumption to get more evenly distributed. So, I mean, if you can, if you're in one local area will have a lot of production, then if you can build consumption in this area, that will sort of even out, and therefore you not have to transport as much electricity up to the higher levels. That will help us to reduce investment cost in the network in total. And then the other part is this with we have to get much more used to using electricity when it's there, when the renewables are there, and we all know that they are much more fluctuating, and therefore we need to prepare all our consumption to be much more following this you can say variable production, and therefore the tariffs has to reflect the actual geographical load in the network. So I think I said the last one I have gone now. Next week. So this was what I was saying about tariffs, and then the last thing I will say just a few words on is the test zones, because we also see a need for accelerating the work in these test zones in order, and the purpose should be to test new solutions, you can say. So what is new solutions? And Henrik has already mentioned a little bit of the summer houses, etc. But the new solutions to be tested could be the taxes, the tariffs, or the integrated energy system. Actually, the summer houses is the integrated energy systems. Is one case of that. So examples are Aarhus Havn, summer houses, it's supermarkets, it's local areas that test activation of flexibility in different areas, and so on. And we have a whole pamphlet describing these different cases if anyone is interested. So that is actually what I wanted to say. So thank you very much.